This is California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. Our guest today is Anthony Portantino. He's a member of the California State Assembly. So I want to speak with you about the question of gun control. It's interesting, over the last 2 years, you have had 2 bills signed by Governor Brown. One could argue they would seem non-controversial, dealing with whether individuals can openly carry either handguns or shotguns. They were signed, and yet you got a lot of flack for submitting these bills and for their ultimate passage. Talk to me about that.
Well, I think it's indicative of the political dynamic we have right now. It's very difficult to have reasonable, common sense conversations about traditionally partisan issues. And frankly, I was asked to carry the open carry legislation by the police chiefs and the rank and file law enforcement because I'm somebody who is respected by both sides of the aisle, and I'm not a bomb thrower, to use a metaphor. You know, I'm somebody who tries to make a reasonable public policy case for this. Even though that's the case in me, I still, received a lot of tension and a lot of Facebook posts, a lot of YouTube stuff. Somebody, stalked me outside the Capitol with a camera one day, and because people are very emotional about this issue.
But why is it this issue has been so ripe for the slippery slope argument? I mean, one could make the slippery slope argument on so many
about
issues.
About everything.
But yet this one, the slippery slope argument, has been incredibly effective.
Well, I think frankly, it's because there's a lack of leadership out there, in a sense, and there's the institutions have taken on so much power in the political discourse, and there are litmus tests.
I mean, you look at the NRA, for example. They have 4 million members, an annual budget of over $200 million. I'm taking nothing away from them, their advocacy, the Second Amendment. But suffice it to say, I mean, this is an organization that wields tremendous power.
Well, yes, they do, but the political conversation is about scorecards and litmus tests, not about public policy. And again, that's a function of the changing nature of political offices and people, getting elected to one office and running for another office because they all want to have good scorecards.
What's interesting is I had thought, and again, I'm not advocating for a position, but just as an observer, I had thought that after Gabby Giffords was gunned down, and her life has been changed irreparably, although she's doing well, that we would start to see some gun control legislation make its way through the United States Congress. Whether that was a good idea or a bad idea, I don't know. I'm not commenting, but that's what I had thought.
Right. You thought it would
Nada.
You thought it would be sort of the precursor to the good public policy debate, and it wasn't. And that's unfortunate because this is a conversation you brought up. Very few people want to do away with the Second Amendment. I mean, we're not talking about the Second Amendment. We're not talking about somebody's rights to buy a weapon, protect their home, which is what the Second Amendment was all about. We're not talking about the legally licensed hunter. We're not talking about the security guard doing their profession. We're not talking about the veteran. What the problem is, we're also not talking about the proliferation of weapons unnecessarily in a bigger picture context.
And it's interesting, at the second presidential debate, there was a question from the audience dealing with gun control. And look, to my eyes, I think both President Obama and Governor Romney kind of danced around the issues. On the issue of the assault weapons ban, I mean, that ban has expired. And so today in America, one can buy an assault weapon. And they've been buying them. And again, I'm not taking a position, but they used them in Columbine, they used them at Virginia Tech, they used them in Aurora, Colorado. What's the
Well, even in our small area, I mean, I've had people come up to me and say, "Hey, Anthony, why are you doing this? Do you know there's a political liability for carrying this legislation?" And I said, for working with law enforcement to solve a problem, that's what we're supposed to do. But people look at this issue as something that hurts you politically if you even stick your toe in the water.
Does it in California?
Well, there are some folks who think it does. I mean, again, I've been taken aside by folks who have questioned, my judgment, and I've gone, wait a minute, this is a problem that needed to be addressed. That was the right thing to do, and that's why I introduced the bill. I also know folks who, are in the same political party that I am, who have looked at my, leadership on this position and have tried to figure out a way maybe to position themselves, people who might run against me down the road, who have looked at this issue to try to figure out where might be a political advantage on it. So people, right, left, and middle, there's a perception that this is a political loser, therefore people shy away from it. I look at it as a public policy issue, and there are parts of it that need to be changed and parts of it that need to be kept. I mean, and that's where, the bigger picture leadership and the activist community and people need to come together and say, we can't be having people gunned down in shopping centers and in movie theaters. We just can't have that.
And what's so interesting is if you look at other democracies around the world, and when they look at us, they're stunned.
Right.
At the amount of gun violence we have. I mean, even places like Israel,
right,
which is under siege at all times. I mean, they can't believe how permissive our gun laws are. And again, I'm just a commentator. I'm not commenting. It's just such an interesting debate that really has taken a turn, and I'm not trying to pit the sides against each other, but I would say in favor of the NRA position. I think that's the way I would say it.
Well, I think liberty and civil liberties and, the rights of this great country are something to be proud of and something to be fought for and something to be protected. And I think some people see this issue as an extension of those. I support all of those, with every fabric of who I am, but that doesn't preclude you from having a reasonable conversation about what's good public policy. Because what's lost in it, and why I carried the open carry bill, is when those 3 people or 4 people or 5 people get out of the car with their weapons, they're parked next to the family who's also going into the coffee shop. Those folks have the same rights, privileges, and liberties that need to be protected. And it's the balance that we're trying to find.
Now, one could argue the irony in this discussion is another bill that you signed, or that was signed by the governor that you carried in the assembly, allowed for increased gun purchases.
Well,
is that a fair way to say it?
I don't know if what it did is it cleared up again. I look at the public policy purpose, and there was a certain part of the entertainment industry that was having trouble dealing with prop guns.
Right.
And so I'm a former filmmaker.
We know that.
And, again.
Once in Hollywood, always in Hollywood.
And I think that's frankly why I'm a little bit different as a policymaker. If it's good public policy and it solves a problem, I'm going to be open to the conversation. In this case, the entertainment industry needed some help on a prop issue. They had a legitimate case. And, I carried a bill to help them. There was also, frankly, a piece of it that said if you register your weapon, you're only going to get charged once as opposed to 3 or 4 times. Again, I find myself, I'm a reasonable policymaker. And so that's why I was chosen to do this. And, I stand by both of the bills. They both served a purpose, and I'm proud to have carried them.
You're concluding your 6 years in the Assembly. As you look back, is there one piece of legislation in which you are most proud?
I would have to say the umbilical cord blood. Before I was in office, 99% of umbilical cord stem cells were thrown away as medical waste after a mother gives birth. We're now collecting and storing and using those to cure leukemia and sickle cell anemia, and to know that when I leave office that somebody someday is going to have their life saved because they got a cord blood transplant makes it all worthwhile, and it makes me continue to be an optimist about the process.
His name is Anthony Portantino, member of the California State Assembly. When we come back, we'll be speaking with Laura Friedman. She is a member of the Glendale City Council. I'm Brad Pomerance. We'll be right back on California Edition.
According to opencarry.org, how many jurisdictions have non-permissive open carry laws? 3, 8, 17, or 23? According to opencarry.org, 8 jurisdictions have non-permissive open carry laws. They are Arkansas, the District of Columbia, Florida, Illinois, New York, Oklahoma, South Carolina, and Texas.
Welcome back to California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. We are now joined by Laura Friedman. She is a member of the Glendale City Council. And I know that the San Gabriel Valley has been dedicated to alternate transportation solutions. We know that the Gold Line goes through portions of the San Gabriel Valley, hopefully more. But it's not just about Metro. It's also about biking and bikes.
Right.
Tell us about it.
Well, the entire region and certainly Glendale have really been stepping up their efforts to encourage cycling and to make the roads safer for bicyclists.
Can I tell you, I was in Amsterdam, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, and I was so amazed. I would see people bike somewhere, they would just drop their bike in the street, and then some other person would pick it up and they'd bike somewhere. I mean, it really was incredibly collaborative. There was no concern about theft or anything like that. I'm not even sure what the program was. Maybe you can tell me.
Well, I don't know about Amsterdam, but a lot of cities in this country now, Washington, D.C., New York City, parts of Los Angeles now, are using bike share programs where you literally check a bike out, you ride it to another stop,
right,
and you put it back, and then the next person comes and takes it. And they're very, very successful.
And I have to think, not only does it ease congestion, it's good for your heart. I mean, heart health. I mean, biking is not easy, and it gets your heart going.
Right.
Tell us about what's happening in Long Beach, because that does seem like an innovative program.
Right. Well, Long Beach in this area has really been the leader. Long Beach dedicated themselves a few years ago and hung a bicycle on the side of City Hall and made their logo for the whole city be, I think it's the most bike-friendly city in the USA. I'm not even,
whatever.
Don't quote me,
Yeah.
but it's something like that.
Got it.
So they really have gone all out. And so they've done all sorts of things. They created an innovative program, which has now been adopted in Los Angeles and downtown LA, of painting green lanes that are shared use lanes. So both bicycles and cars can ride in them.
No, that's interesting.
And what it does is it tells the cars, bikes are allowed to be here, they're supposed to be here.
So it's not just the thin lanes that you see at the side, but these are
These are actually in the lane.
Wow.
So there are 4 areas where a lot of our streets are older. They weren't created with bicycle lanes in mind.
And not enough room to
Not
create
enough
one.
room. So what they've done is, what we've done in Glendale is what's called sharrows. And those are shared lane markings. And what they have is a little picture of a bike and some arrows telling the cyclist what direction they're supposed to be going into. So they're
Fair
also
enough,
educational.
right.
But what they do is they don't change any rules, but they signal to the cars, there might be cyclists here, be aware, be careful, be on the lookout. And they also tell the cyclists where the safest place on that particular road is to ride, because people don't always realize this who are not cyclists.
Right.
But riding on the far right hand a lot of times is not the safest place to be. And I'll give you a few examples.
Please.
Well, the obvious one is if there's debris in the lane. A lot of times the street sweepers will brush all the debris, the broken glass and everything into the curb, and you don't want to be riding your bike there.
No, pop
But
tires.
also, if there's parked cars alongside of a road, you want to be riding to where you're not moving in and out of cars, because the other cars that are driving won't be able to see you if you pop out from behind a parked car. In addition, you also have to stay out of what's called the door zone. And that's a really dangerous place where a cyclist is riding alongside of a parked car. All of a sudden, someone in that parked car opens a car door and you have a terrible accident.
You talk about this, and it harkens me to Sam Pedroso, who had been mayor of Claremont. This is public knowledge, but he was riding too close to the edge of the street, and he hit a parked car.
Right.
And if he had been in one of these shadowed lanes, that would not have happened.
Yeah, and unfortunately, sometimes the cars can be aggressive and they bully the riders to move over, and it can cause all kinds of problems. There was a fatality in Los Angeles this last weekend, and it looks like that may have been a contributing factor.
So are bikers safe in these lanes? I mean, are you feeling as if that we've gotten to a point where it's actually safer there than elsewhere?
Well, having ridden on the green Sharrow lanes in Long Beach.
Yes, by the way, the Councilwoman Friedman absolutely is a bike rider herself.
I am, and having ridden on our Sharrow lanes in Glendale, it's an illusion that you're any safer because there's nothing structural around you, but I think the cars definitely are more on the lookout for you. They're less likely to honk or bully you because now it's signaling to them, no, this is where this person's supposed to be. And I can tell you this, that when they installed the green lanes in downtown Los Angeles, the first day it was there, their female ridership improved 100%. The
interesting.
weekend, their female ridership increased 650%.
What is it about?
So clearly people are thinking that this makes them feel safer.
I also want to ask you about whether we're going to see a proliferation of these shared lanes, because that obviously is the ticket. Because if they're hyper regionalized, I mean, it's great for small communities, but if we really want to see biking become a regional solution like it is in Amsterdam or DC or Long Beach, apparently, it needs to be more regional.
Right. I hope that we see more of these sorts of shared lane markings. It was a debate in our city. City councils are not always sold on the idea. Engineers who are more old school are not always sold on the idea. Sometimes there's a feeling that we shouldn't encourage bikes unless there's an actual physical bike lane that's separated from the traffic. But in my mind, the most important thing is to make the road safer for all of the legal users of the road. And bicycles, by law, are just as legally able to be in the road. The road is just as much for them as it is for cars.
And here's more good news as it relates to bikers. You know, we're really starting to get the metro to proliferate.
Right.
Subway, bus, but sometimes your metro stop, your bus stop is just not walking distance to your job or your location. And so you may take your bike, but the problem becomes as biking proliferates, there aren't enough places to put bikes.
Right.
And so you get crowded out, but that's changing.
That's changing. Well, for one thing, in Glendale, we've been installing bike racks citywide, so that if you do ride your bike to the library, you know there's going to be a bike rack there. If you ride your bike to a great restaurant, we're going to have a bike rack there for you. But in terms of the stations, what some cities have done, going back to Long Beach again, is they've created bike stations where you can actually rent a sort of a place to put your bike very inexpensively, month to month, or even just one time, and you can leave your bike there. In San Francisco, I've gone to these stations in the metro, bike stations, where there are literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of bikes parked every day. People riding to the metro stop, like you said, parking their bike in literally a large cage where there's an attendant who gives you a check ticket.
Right.
Leave your bike, it's totally safe, and then you come back and retrieve it later. And they'll check your tires for you. They'll make sure there's air in your tires because they're trying to encourage people.
Course.
They'll fix your flats, all of that for free.
But in addition to that, if you look at some of the metro buses, we're going to find now more bike racks to put your bike on in case you need to put it on.
Right.
And tell us about the new Metro car dedicated bike cars.
Yes, MTA now has on their trains bike cars where there's more parking for bikes. In fact, the downstairs I think is all bike parking or almost all bike parking, and then you go upstairs to sit. So no longer are you going to have to try to stand there and be the awkward person with a lot of people around you trying to hold a bike. Now you know that you're going to have a place to put your bike when you get on MetroLink.
Do you feel as if there really is kind of a groundswell of support for this type of transportation solution? Because look, LA is one big urban sprawl, and I'm not trying to be pejorative, it's just, and when I say LA, I mean the metro area. And I don't know how much rail line we can put in, it's still going to be difficult to hit all these locations. So we need those connectors, and a bike can be that connector.
That's right, and the statistics also show that 80% of all car trips are under 2 miles. If you think about it, maybe you commute to work, maybe you commute places that are longer, but most of your trips are going to be going to the grocery store, going to the dry cleaners, going wherever within that 2 mile radius, and that's a very bikeable distance.
It really is, and I just would hope that we could create a culture that would encourage that behavior. I mean, I keep going back to Amsterdam and other cities in Europe. I mean, it really is kind of a cultural phenomenon. And the notion that you would not bike to pick up your dry cleaning or go to, you know, the local restaurant, it's just foreign. It's just not what happens. But we're the reverse right now.
Right. We're trying to reverse that. And I find that a lot of people really want this kind of living. When I'm out there and talking to constituents, what I hear most is, you know, I'd love to ride my bike more. I have great memories of being a kid and riding my bike, but I'm afraid. So really what we're doing is empowering those people to make those choices themselves, to say, I want to live a healthier lifestyle, I want to help the environment, I want my child to have the same experience that I was able to have of riding my bike safely around his neighborhood. So we need to make it possible for that to happen.
And you're a biker yourself. We have pictures showing it. We have the proof. Laura Friedman, I want to thank you so much for joining us. She is a member of the Glendale City Council. My name is Brad Pomerance. We'll be right back on California Edition.
What percentage of American adults use a biking, walking, or hiking trail at least once per week. 15, 22, 25, or 32%. Approximately 25% of U.S. adults use a biking, walking, or hiking trail at least once per week.
This is California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. Our guest, he's back, Dr. Gil Garcia. He is a member of the Rowland Unified School District. He's a board member. And you have presented me with what I would call a very impressive framework for efficacious instruction. In fact, that's the title of it. And I actually kind of like the way that you set it out. You can see the text on here. It's quite unique, but it's intentional. It's intentional.
Very intentional.
Yeah, so let's talk about this because you have 5 elements of efficacious instruction. And I want to go through this because, you know, these are tough times and yet there is creative thinking out there. Talk to me about the framework for efficacious instruction.
This framework was the result of a process that we instituted when we first started talking about our strategic plan. And as part of our strategic plan, we saw that in the future, what we wanted to do is be very deliberate about how we delivered instruction.
And let's talk about that deliberate thinking because you have 5 elements. I'd love to go through them if we can.
Sure.
And the first element, which I think is so pivotal, is developing expert learners, learning how to learn.
Not an easy thing to do. We, of course, over the years have delivered instruction in a way where the teacher delivers and we kind of fill up the vessel of those students that are before us. And there's a lot to learning. And our belief is that involvement is one of those major elements, that we want children to be involved in the instruction in ways that they haven't been in the past.
So the days of the teacher standing in front of the classroom, writing on the on the chalkboard, and then you have students just taking down recitation, those days are gone.
We hope they're gone. What we're looking for is we're looking for collaboration. We're looking for project-based learning. We're looking for ways of involving technology in a way that really involves students.
Especially in the 21st century.
Absolutely. So the 21st century student is going to be a different looking student than they were in the past.
What about the second element? Gather and respond to feedback. Is that student feedback, parent feedback, test feedback?
It could be all types of feedback. Certainly data enters here, and the feedback, part of that feedback is that teachers are looking at data. We're surrounded by data, and there's a lot of data.
Too much?
No, in fact, even though there's a lot, and some folks believe that there is too much, there's a lot of data that we still don't have.
But what about testing, teaching to the test?
Well, I think this is something that we want to get away from, obviously. We don't want to teach to the test. We want to develop thinkers. Now, you can't do that if you're just teaching to a test. In addition, though, there are many things about our students that we don't know, and they involve things like often their culture. I mean, the reality is that teachers come into the classroom and often aren't aware of who sits in front of them.
And you mentioned culture, and I think that word can mean a lot of different things. You had showed me the API scores for Rowland Unified, and this is public knowledge, and it's a metaphor in so many ways that the kids on the north side of the tracks, metaphorically speaking, have much higher API scores than it's the reverse. The kids on the south, you say it for me.
Okay.
It's
Rowland,
a metaphor, more importantly.
It is indeed a metaphor in that our school district is divided by railroad tracks.
Oh,
and
so it's not a metaphor, it's
no,
literal.
I mean, it's a literal, it's literal in this case, that the railroad tracks simply cross Rowland Unified School District, almost cut it in half, and there's a north and south side. And on our south side, our scores happen to be higher. API is higher than it is on the north side.
I mean, by significant margins in some cases.
There
you
are-
have 200-point swings.
But at the same time, there are issues that need to be considered. For example, the economics of the area.
But that's the culture you're talking about.
English learners.
Right.
Well, but I'm also talking about, when I'm really talking about culture and the differences within the groups, so that a group being Latino, or a group being Chinese, or a group being Muslim, or wherever they come from, there are there are characteristics of each one of these groups that are different.
And I think that takes us to the third element, which is developing teacher clarity. What does that mean to you?
What it means to me is that there are many ways of approaching instruction, teaching. I was a teacher a long time ago.
you were.
I taught 3 years at the high school level, and the way that I approached it is probably very much different than it is today, because we've learned a lot about best practice, about what we should be doing in terms of how students learn, etc. So what we've done is we've considered principles of the mind, that is brain research. We've considered best practice. We've had teachers read in small groups where they get together in communities of practice, where they're actually examining what is the best practice when it comes to instruction.
But when you say clarity, is it well-organized lessons? Is that really what you're looking
No,
for? So the
with,
students...
with regard to this particular document, the clarity comes in being very clear as to what we mean when we say something, so that if we are defining instruction to be this, we are giving teachers and anyone who reads this document an example of exactly what it should look like in the classroom, and exactly what students would be doing in the classroom, and also non-exemplars, things that this does not mean for us.
And speaking of students, the fourth element becomes building democratic relationships. That's interesting. One could interpret that to mean that the balance of power shouldn't be as autocratic, but I guess you mean something different.
Well, I think you're on the right track.
Right.
The autocratic nature of our classrooms has been traditional. Traditional classrooms have been very autocratic, with the teacher in charge and the students participating, listening. By promoting these democratic relationships, is that we have in mind getting students to the point where they have a say in the direction of the learning, so that they have needs, they have wants, they have...
So it's not a lack of discipline. You're not creating
No.
anarchy.
No. We obviously have a set curriculum in every one of the subjects. However, there are big questions that we want to pursue, and those questions should be generated from students, and we should pursue the questions that students have, because part of motivating students and getting them involved in learning is indeed getting them involved in something that they're interested in. If they're not interested in the topic, it's going to be very difficult.
Which takes us to the fifth point, which is a corollary to the fourth point, and that is design for invested cognition.
Exactly, and that goes right to the heart of the motivation. So that the invested cognition is that true engagement in the learning. You can't get engaged unless...
I got to ask you this. I was telling someone earlier this morning, a member of a different school board, that my niece is a senior in high school, and so she's preparing and taking the SAT. And so I decided to take a practice SAT in English and in math, not the entire SAT. On the English portion, I got 100. On the math, I got 0. Zero.
On math, you got zero.
And that goes to the issue of invested cognition, because I remember as I was getting into advanced math, I was not invested. I had I was baffled, I had no interest. And so I'm just wondering is, when you're looking at invested cognition, especially at high school, there are so many courses that are shoved down your throat because of the SAT, and you got to learn advanced algebra and trig. That's a tough one for me.
Well, I think it's a tough one for everyone, and science, like math for me, was very similar in my experience.
But at least with science, I mean, you can, look, I don't want to bash math, but at least with science, I mean, science is around us, so is math. I don't know, I just feel like these advanced math classes, if you're not that math person, invested cognition becomes very difficult.
It's very difficult, but it's not impossible, and I think that's the challenge that we have. We have to figure out what is it about algebra, and algebra is a big gatekeeper at the high school level. Kids have to pass algebra so they can get...
Algebra's fine, but once you start getting to algebra 2 and trigonometry, I mean, it's mind-numbing for some.
It was mind-numbing for me too.
Right.
But I got through it, and I think the challenge, again, I'll go back to the challenge that teachers have, that we have as a district, those that choose the curriculum, that define the curriculum, we have to come up with ways of making that meaningful to students and motivate them.
I'm impressed. I'm impressed. His
Thank
name is
you.
Gil Garcia, member of the Rowland Unified School District. I'm Brad Pomerance. Thanks for watching California Edition.